Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to give us a couple of more minutes to get settled. I'm going to invite everyone to come up and take a seat up here on this round table, just so we're all a bit closer. Okay, great. I think we can go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone, again, and thank you so much for joining us here at the 2025 Internet Governance Forum in Oslo, and a very warm welcome to everyone tuning in via the live stream. My name is Judith Vega, and I'm a specialist at the World Economic Forum working on governance and policy for technologies. It is my sincere pleasure to be your moderator for today on this session focusing on the future of digital public infrastructure and artificial intelligence. As we all get settled, I want to start today by making a bold claim. So I'm going to ask us a question here. Most of us on a daily basis interact with DPI protocols and tools. And I'll get to prove my point in a second. By show of hands, can I ask how many of you here in this room have a smartphone with Face ID? All right, that's not bad for people at the Internet Governance Forum. That's pretty good. All right, how many of you have social media accounts that require login information and a password? It doesn't have to be Facebook. It can be LinkedIn. It can be whatever your choice is. Good. That's all right. That's most of us again. And how many of you use digital payment systems? That's more of us. There we go. So there's a reason that most of us in the room raised our hands. And it's that over the past decade, DPI has become the cornerstone that allows all of us to navigate and participate in society through its core components, which are digital identity, digital payment systems, and data exchange. And there's a wide variety of ranges that we can do that in. And most of the innovations in those three sections have come really from the private sector in the last couple of years. So the question that we ask today is not, does DPI work, or how does it work, but rather, how do we get it to work well? How do we get it to work in the future in a way that is globally scaled, interoperable, and secure? And we pose that perhaps the answer lies in AI, in open source AI very specifically. And if so, then what are the roles of the public and private sector? What can they both play to make sure that this comes to fruition? To answer these questions today, I'm thrilled to be joined by three outstanding panelists. To my right, I have Larry Wade, Global Head of Compliance for PayPal's blockchain, crypto, and digital currencies, offering a critical perspective on financial innovation and regulatory frameworks. Thank you for being here, Larry. And to his right, we have Melinda Kleibau, Policy Privacy Director at Meta, who brings a wealth of experience in privacy and platform governance. And then joining remotely, we have Judith Okonkwo. I'm not sure if you can see. She's the founder of Emisi 3D. She's a pioneer in immersive technologies and open innovation, especially across the African continent. I remind you that this is an open forum, so we invite your questions, your reflections throughout the entire session. Whether you're here in person or joining us online, your voice is essential to this dialogue. And with that, I begin with a question for Melinda. Melinda, Meta has broken ground with their open AI source model. Can I ask you, how does Meta view AI? What does it feel like the future of AI is? What is this AI integration across regions and cross-jurisdictionally? And how do you see open source AI contributing to the development of DPI protocols globally?
I think that was 3 questions or so, at least. Hello, everyone. Melinda Kleibau from Meta. Really happy to be here. Thanks for organizing. Yeah, so just to level set for a minute about AI at Meta, we are both a developer and provider of a large language model that we call Llama. We've produced multiple versions of Llama at this point, and we also build services on top of our large language model. So just for a minute, our open source approach to building our large language model Llama really means that we make a very powerful large language model available for free to anyone to build on it. This is an incredible advantage to anyone who wants to have access to cutting edge technology, and it allows a really impressive level of customization for developers who want to provide bespoke solutions for their companies, their constituents, their stakeholders, their countries and regions. And so we think that open source is an incredibly powerful tool to accelerate the adoption and use and implementation of AI, but most importantly, to make it as useful as possible for as cheap as possible to people. We also are very focused on building and incorporating AI into our existing services and developing new services based on AI. So if you're a user of our apps, you will have seen that we've already added generative AI features into our apps that let you do fun things, of course, but also to ask questions and get information and answers. We've also recently launched a standalone app that you can have ongoing conversations with, that you can talk to, ask for recommendations, that kind of thing. And so we really see the future of AI as a personalized experience, a personalized assistant for you in your day-to-day life. And I think we are getting increasingly closer to that being a reality. Recently, for those of you who may have seen our booth, that our Meta booth has our glasses. Our Meta AI assistant has been integrated with Ray-Ban Meta's eyeglasses. So that means you can wear these glasses and walk around and talk to the glasses and ask the glasses, hey, I'm in Oslo, what am I looking at? Or what does this sign say in Norwegian? Can you translate it for me? And so these are just really concrete, easy, fun examples of the way that AI and AI powered by open source technology is really coming into our daily lives and providing a lot of value.
Thank you, Melinda. I have a follow-up. You said that this is providing daily value, which I think is very, very true. In AI providing value to these technologies and these new products, where do you see these being integrated the most? Where do you find that people are using this sort of open AI source the most?
Yeah, so I mean, when you think about our open source models that have been downloaded millions and millions of times, I mean, we're tracking a lot of uses in really groundbreaking ways. So our llama models are being deployed to make scientific discoveries for advances in health research. They're being deployed in small communities around the world to help kids with their homework in a local language. You know, they're just being deployed in really creative, interesting ways that are helping people day to day. I think we tend to think about, oh, what's the latest cute feature on this or app or that app, and that's fun. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of just the importance of this foundational technology and the value that these models can provide. And so we've run programs where we provide impact grants to entities that have interesting pitches and ideas, and we provide technical assistance. And I think we're still learning. The sky's really the limit in terms of how AI can be leveraged to solve local problems in a really inexpensive way.
Thank you, Melinda. I want to stay with this topic of value, and Larry, I want to turn to you. PayPal as a leader in digital payment systems, how does it see its value, the transfer of financial values in sort of this next era of the internet with AI? How does it see it changing with AI?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's pretty much an optimization layer in a way. Our CEO, Alex Chris, likes to say our goal is to revolutionize commerce. That's what we want to do, because we have this two-sided network, so we get to see consumers and merchants, almost 400 million wallets in 200 countries. So it's this very robust ecosystem that we get to see. When you look at, from my vantage point, distributed ledger technology, so that's blockchain, digital assets, AI is going to be essential in a few ways, right? So think about just onboarding customers. Believe it or not, depending on where you are in the world, is extremely challenging. So the customer identification process, KYC, KYB, so know your customer, know your business, and especially on the small business side, it can be challenging. Being able to utilize tools such as AI to be able to say, all right, there's additional attributes that we can look at in order to gain comfort with onboarding this customer segment, which now we can facilitate providing different services that we couldn't in the past. Sounds very simple, but again, when you're talking about compliance or just risk management globally, that's essential. Blocking and tackling on fraud and financial crimes. Just making sure that people, when you're dealing with money, that I like to say the internet kind of 2.0 democratized information. Beautiful. This Web3 is democratizing value, and when you're democratizing value, the stakes are even higher because everyone needs to transact. So being able to enable a safer environment to enhance and improve the velocity of transactions, that's going to be essential there. So again, fraud, BSA, AML, sanctions, etc. And then also just the overall experience. What are people doing and how? AI allows us to see patterns that we typically are unable to see. So we launched the first stablecoin by a major financial institution that is regulated, PYUSD. And a fiat-backed stablecoin, again, many benefits to it. AI, deploying AI right now allows us to kind of start seeing, okay, where is it being used? How is it being used? What potential use cases? How can we allow this tool that allows for faster, cheaper, programmable, value transfer with instant finality? And then I would say lastly, kind of tying the blockchain and AI as well, is this notion of asset provenance, right? So I will talk to merchants, and let's just say you're Nike and you have the physical good and you have the digital representation as well, right? When you start getting into physical and digital, knowing what is valid is going to be extremely important. It's kind of almost that blue check. Well, think about when you have your digital twin, when you have AI generated outputs, being able to utilize kind of NFT technology to be able to put that stamp to say this is the real one, this is that digital one of one. That's also something that's going to be important. So the digital identity component and also the asset provenance component, as well as just optimizing the overall experience for value transfer, that's kind of where AI is being integrated right now. And it's actually still early days. But I do think we're going to hit a point on the curve where we're going to see exponential change.
On that exponential change that you talk about, looking into the future, do you think that AI is going to be foundational for seamless integration between public digital wallets and then private digital wallets and services?
100%. And the reason why is, again, when you're dealing with value transfer, trust, compliance, it's essential. And you can't get it wrong. So when you can improve those kind of core tenets of how we're going to integrate with these wallets, which are going to hold value, right? Not only just fiat value or ties to the banking system, it'll be also just bearer assets that hold value that you want to just keep yourself in self-custody. So I think it'll be essential. And what it'll do is those experiences from the onboarding to the continuous monitoring, understanding what are the preventative and detective controls around this ecosystem, it'll enhance that. Again, it'll also allow us to improve pattern recognition. Just being able to lower bad things, the likelihood of bad things happening, improve the experience to make sure that activities feel more seamless. That's what AI is good for. So I can't see it not being critical.
Thank you, Larry. I want to turn to Judith now, if we can get her on the screen. Hi, Judith. Can you hear us?
Hello, Judith. Yes, I can.
Hi. Thank you
Can
so
you
much
hear me
for.
okay?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. I wanna bring you in on this. We're talking about AI enhancing across the DPI protocols and services, and you've done a lot of work on adoption of AI and integration. And I want to ask you, is there any particular area that you feel AI integration is particularly important, and where is it critical? And are there any barriers to integrating open source AI across different regions and across different jurisdictions?
Uh, yes, thank you very much for the question. I'll probably start with sort of like AI integration from an open source perspective and what it enables. For context, the work that we do at Embassy 3D over sort of like the last decade has been centered on ecosystem development for the immersive technology, so augmented virtual and mixed reality across Africa. And as you can imagine, there have been lots of barriers, right? From the perspective of access, infrastructure, all of that, for people to engage with these technologies, but even more importantly, to be able to build with them for society. And I think one of the exciting things about the integration of open source AI is that it allows us to start to benefit from the convergence of these technologies, because really I think it isn't either or when it comes to these technologies. We can see them coming together to really create products and services that can have a real benefit for society. And so when I think about what AI is now making possible, especially open source AI, it's driving experimentation. It's allowing people to build, but not have to start from scratch, for example, which is really really important. And to give you some context about what that looks like in practice for things happening at the immersive technology end of things, with our work in some of our communities, we have worked on a number of projects, which I will mention, which are now really benefiting from the availability of open source AI tools. One project is a product called Autism VR, which was designed as a voice driven virtual reality game. And the idea with this was creating something that would um, really start to kind of like shift the needle when it comes to the lack of awareness about neurodiversity, particularly among children. Because, of course, we're coming from well, a context where mental health care is severely under resourced, and where the lack of information about neurodiversity has really caused a lot of not just discrimination but exclusion for children that does should not happen. With the advances that we now have, the availability of open source AI tools, it's now possible to say not only are we going to integrate that voice driven component, which makes it a much more engaging tool for the general population to engage with, but that we can also leverage language capability, right? Because we're coming from, communities where several different languages are spoken on a daily basis, and building solely for English, for example, has really limited the public ability to engage. Another example I wanted to cite, kind of like related to that, is a VR for Schools initiative that we have. And this is now looking at deploying this technology in really resource constrained learning environments. So, how can we go into a situation where, for example, you have a school without um, infrastructure for things like science experiments, right? In that kind of resource constrained environment, can you bridge the gap with immersive tools, right? Can you create a VR lab where students are then able to do simulations? And now that's one step there, but then imagine the ability to have agents who can act as guides built on top of these, open source AI tools that can then provide the support within the immersive environments for those students learning. And what that does is then make this a tool that you can deploy not just in a classroom setting, but also in much more informal contexts. And I think when we think about situations where you have um, children who unfortunately are out of school, you then get to the concept of almost taking the school to the child where they are, if you're able to have this combination. But moving from that to your question about the barriers to integration of open source. Ooh, I think we see much of the same constraints that we've seen from the immersive technology side. I think a major one to talk about is skills, the sort of like capacity gap, and what needs to be done about that. I think to be able to leverage um, open source AI, we need to invest significantly in educating people and making sure that we have the knowledge and skills locally to build and doing this across the board, right? And I think alongside that, there's definitely even just sort of like a link to the awareness piece, right? A lot of work that needs to be done from a digital literacy perspective. Um, Other barriers to this integration, I would definitely talk about infrastructure. Much of the same sort of like handicaps we have with immersive, also existing with open source AI, particularly when it comes to the internet. And I think, well, in a country like Nigeria, for example, it's really great to see the investment that's happening now in that space to make significant changes and get as many people online as possible. And then data, we need localized data sets. We need to be able to train models so that they're relevant for us. And I know that that's work that's currently ongoing. There are lots of fantastic initiatives. Masakane is one. So there are barriers, but the work has begun, although there is a lot more to be done.
Thank you so much, Judith. I love when panelists also share my first name, so it's lovely to call on you. But I want to stay with this idea of AI being useful to build upon and to get us ready for sort of this next phase of tools that are really being deployed and used for public good and good consumption. And I want to turn to Melinda now. I wonder, part of critical to sort of DPI building this idea of hardware, and Meta has begun to produce good hardware, valuable hardware. What do you think is important to be able to scale that hardware? What is the role of AI there?
So I think we want to make products that are useful to people, and so part of this is we've launched the glasses a few years ago, and we continue to roll them out to more and more countries. We continue to add more functionality from the AI perspective as the AI gets better and more useful. Part of this is an iterative process, right? Understanding these are new concepts. These are, wearing AI on your face is new. And so I think what we have to do is test things out and see, and how do people use them? What are the use cases? How do people find them useful? And then we bake that back into the development process for our products. And so I think it's a learning process over time. Obviously, there are constraints in terms of how to actually build something that fits your face and has a battery that works and can, there's questions around processing and all of that. But I think the biggest challenges are really around adoption and how are people planning to use these and making them available in as many countries as possible, making the AI as useful to as many places as possible. And so part of that, Judith, the prior panelist, was talking about making local data available. And I think that is really crucial to unlocking the power of AI. And so, we train our AI on a wide variety of data, but we don't have access to a lot of data that would make the models most useful to local communities. And so that's, again, why the open source component is so important, because local developers can build on top of our model by adding data sets that are relevant for that country, community, region. And so I think all of this has to kind of work together to figure out what is most useful in terms of having AI available to you? Is it in your app? Is it on your face? Is it all of it? And I think it's exciting. We'll see a lot of different approaches from different companies in how to make AI products as relevant and as useful as possible for people's day-to-day lives.
Thank you very much. I'm going to actually open this question up now to any of our panelists. We recognize the importance of localized data, data sets, and integration and harmonization of these technologies. I want to ask, this is from the private sector. We know that there's development here. What would help, what would be beneficial from the public sector to be able to achieve these goals?
Yeah, I can take that one. And just before I dive in there, something Judith said, and you hit it as well, kind of she said, bring it to where the kids are. There's a reason why there are so many unbanked or underbanked people in the world. A lot of it has to do with just the overall risk tolerance of institutions that are serving them, whether it's their own policies or, again, restrictions placed on them from whatever kind of local regime from a regulatory perspective. So just wanted to hit on that same thing. Once you kind of can use AI to solve that more localization, additional attributes, hey, here's additional data that can actually de-risk this customer, again, opens up things. But to answer your question, and this is something I have to deal with all the time, it's being able to bring the regulators and governments along the journey with you. And it has to be a public-private partnership. Again, when you're dealing with these very complex topics that impact society in such systemic ways, you have to make sure that those who are making the policies are not making them in silos, that you're knowledge sharing, and hopefully that governing body, wherever they are, they're kind of giving you the ability to experiment. So there's this constant push and pull of there's rulemaking, here's why, that sounds great, but it's not feasible. We do need rules because we need to be able to ensure that we all have a kind of general set of parameters to play with. So I think that back and forth relationship, the kind of minimum expectations, guiding principles, minimum requirements, and also just being comfortable with when information changes, both sides being able to kind of change with it, I think is really, really important for all of this to flourish.
Thank you, Larry. On your point, I want to open this up now to the rest of the room. And also, I'm joined by Agustina Caligari, who's lead for the Global Coalition of Digital Safety at the World Economic Forum, who's serving as our online moderator. So please, if you have any questions for our panel, either online or in person, this is your time. Please raise your hand and join the conversation. Agustina, do we have anyone online?
Judith. I have a question here for Judith, who is online. The question is that if there are any examples of South-to-South cooperation for open source AI sharing. Yeah, that's the question, Judith, for you, if you can listen in well.
Thank you. Hello, thank you very much for the question. So any examples of South-to-South open source sharing? Sort of like the examples that I'm most familiar with at the moment are around community. So one of the things that has really driven the concept of open source on the continent that I know about is the open source community, the African version, and they have collaborated across board with communities in other South countries. And I want to highlight this because the concept of open source has given people pause several times on the continent, because it's the idea of, there's this sort of like reaction: what, you want me to make it freely available? Then how are we going to make money? How are we going to benefit economically? That sort of thing. And so there's been a real need for education around open source, and kind of like all of the affordances that it then provides for everyone, including the people who are building in the first instance. So that's what I would mention, but I'm not aware of many other sort of like core examples, and I'll definitely look that up. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. There's another question that is related to what Larry was saying about working with policymakers. So how do you ensure continuous sharing of knowledge with policymakers?
Yep. So I think one, it's having a respectful, honest relationship with the regulators that you are working with for your particular business, and ensuring that you are having engagement with the actual kind of government officials, again, in not only in your jurisdiction, but in those jurisdictions that you are interacting with. So a couple things. Take the digital asset business in PayPal. So again, two-sided network. How do you integrate this technology into Rails to enable faster, cheaper, more programmable, just value transfer within that ecosystem? One, what you just mentioned also on open source, the reason why we chose to use open source protocols was, one, how do you attract the best talent to work on protocols? It needs to be open source. Two, how do you not pick winners and losers? Open source. So like, just for anyone who's kind of asking that as well, we really thought about that too. Even with PYUSD, they're on open source blockchains. Now, there's obviously a need for private at times, but again, if we're going to allow these technologies to grow, open source tends to be the best approach. But again, just making sure that you have those regular cadences. It sounds really simple, but it's challenging. Who are those regulators? Who are those policymakers? What are the regular cadences? How are we bringing value to them? How are we kind of self-reporting when things are going right or wrong before they ask? A lot of this is about trust. There are brilliant people working on these things, right? Engineering is not really the issue right now. If you think about it, take all these amazing technologies we have right now, whether it's AI or quantum computing or blockchain digital assets. There are brilliant minds working on them. The real gaps are around all the people who are going to help facilitate the introduction of these technologies into society. And that's on the policy side. And again, that's in the businesses. So having just that respectful, honest, transparent relationship in knowledge sharing on a frequent basis goes a long way.
I'm going to take the liberty to interrupt our Q&A segment for a bit. I want to follow up on this. Trust is earned, right? It's something that requires a sustained period of time of interaction. Does PayPal find that it becomes more trustworthy in using open source?
I would say yes, and it's interesting because it's not only just trust. So take a step back. We have a stable coin with our name on it. We work with other institutions. Being able to say, hey, yes, this is PayPal stablecoin, but it's on an open source blockchain, allows that institution to feel like they have more skin in the game. When we're working with regulators, and I'm fortunate that I get to speak to regulators all around the world. I was in Singapore a couple of weeks ago meeting with the MAS, and then in the UK meeting the FCA, and I deal with the New York Department of Financial Services literally every other week, and just all the different alphabet soup. These open source protocols also allows them to have a little bit more agency on how they evaluate. So I found it to be beneficial. With that said, I do think there is the need for some walled gardens, and that's where this whole notion of interoperability is going to come into play. Because there are times where you need an intranet or you need a closed, ecosystem. But then how do you ensure that there's an interoperability protocol to interact outside when the time is needed. I think that's also part of that open source story and how you'll see both of those playing out.
Can I ask when those times are that you need a closed garden or an intranet?
Sure. Let's say you're a big bank and you just did a syndicated wind farm deal in Canada. And the arranging bank now, via some smart contract, it's determined that whatever threshold is met, now we can disperse out payments. Does everybody need to see that? No. Does everyone need to see how, the Visa MasterCard network, how participants? No, right? Do you want to see? Would you want people to see all of your PayPal transactions? No. So I think that it's fine to have a little bit of privacy. I think privacy is going to actually be really important. And it's funny because we're talking open source, but then now we're going to privacy. And again, this is why this is all so complicated, but also why it's so fun, because we are solving new problems that I don't think humanity's ever had to think about on this scale because these technologies are so revolutionary. So I think there definitely are times where it needs to be between us. But ultimately, both are needed.
No, I couldn't agree more, and I certainly don't want everyone seeing my transactions on PayPal.
Right.
But with that, I open it up again to the floor once more. Yes, there's a question in the back.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Merin. I am a researcher at IT for Change, which is an NGO that works at the intersections of digital technology and social justice. So my question, it's a two-part question. So one is a more basic question on, I want to understand better what you think or how do you see, how do you define an open source AI? Because the issue is, one issue concern that we have is even when we talk about open source and the possibilities of innovation that it allows for it, it seems that the foundational models are still being controlled by few actors. It's not really democratized. So what is, if for me, open source AI is something is also equivalent to a democratized access and development of AI. So if the core foundational models are still controlled by a few actors, then what is the then how do you define open source AI? And secondly, I think you mentioned in one of your interventions that open source, when you integrate open source AI into DPI, it also allows agency to the regulators to evaluate it. So I want to understand what are the benefits of open source when it is integrated with DPI. What are how does it allow the public actors to evaluate? Because when DPI is essentially used for various core governance aspects, and it can impinge on the rights of the citizens. So how does open source allow in the regulators to have more oversight over the DPI applications that are being used for governance structures? Yeah, that's it.
I'll kind of, oh,
Go ahead, please.
yeah, I'll give you kind of my thought. That's a great question, by the way. Thank you. So let's kind of go back to, I'll use this kind of Internet 2.0, 3.0 example again. So in Internet 2.0, you had these brilliant engineers that created this infrastructure. Who extracted value from that infrastructure layer? None of the infrastructure builders. All the value was at the application layer, pretty much. So I also think that's why we have some of the issues we have now, right? But again, there was tons of innovation. We're moving forward. The way I think about open source is that infrastructure layer is open, where developers can work and build, and there will be times that they build applications that are open source themselves, and then there will be times where applications do need to be a little bit close. But ultimately, if you don't have the open source infrastructure layer, now you also just have that problem at the application layer again. And being able to have value transfer mechanisms aligned to the infrastructure layer is a really important idea, because it incentivizes brilliant minds to work on them because they have some upside now. And then also it allows for a little bit more just competition on what's going to win. Because ultimately, if I can extract value from various infrastructure layers, what's going to make me pick one over the other? Maybe it's just better. So that's kind of how I think about that. And then your question on the regulator side, again, you're dealing with people who you have a lot more expertise than they do because they have such wide scopes and you're living it every day. So if you have a starting point where there's an understanding of what the kind of infrastructure is, as you're building more complex products on top of it, the discussions are a little easier. So, I mean, it happens all the time just with what I have to do, just again, in the digital asset and distributed technology space, right? So if I come in and say, hey, we want to build this new product that, allows for X, but we're building it on this open source blockchain that you are familiar with, at a minimum, there's a little bit of comfort when we come to them with what we're trying to pitch. And then now the complication is on that actual innovation on top of that. I don't know if that helps a little bit, but it's kind of like this beautiful dance in a way.
Thank you, Larry. I know we have a question here, but this gentleman was up first, so if you'd like to go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Harald Alvestjan. There's a fundamental conflict in payment systems, in that payment systems have to be accurate to the cent, and they have to be auditable. Rules have to be followed. While AI is typical in detecting interesting patterns, coming up with surprising answers, and being absolutely hopeless at explaining how they achieve them. Can you talk a little bit about how you mitigate that conflict when you embed AI in payment systems?
Excellent question. This is fun. So the way I like to think about things is, let's take payments here. 80% of what we need to do, we can leverage best practices and just tried and true, hey, we know this works. So overlaying AI, again, it's about optimization. We wouldn't throw out all of the policies, procedures, and controls that are already developed to make sure that we can adhere. Even though, by the way, there is a lot of friction and a lot of errors even in the existing system, right? And there's a lot of true-ups and things of that nature. But the way I see AI integrating into payments is not saying, all right, we're just going to rely on AI for this. It's, we've been doing X, Y, Z. So PayPal, we've been moving money for 20 years. We've been doing it well. Okay, overlaying AI now can give a better customer experience, could actually now find those tail situations, and can just better refine us making sure that we meet any obligations to customers, regulators, etc. So again, optimization rather than pure reliance. That's kind of how I see that. So it's a partnership. It's a good question.
Thank you, Larry. And then we have a gentleman here to the right.
Thank you. My name is Satish, and I have a long background in open source. I am presently part of ICANN and .Asia organization. I sense a little bit of uncertainty when you refer to open source AI, because open source from the last 20 plus years of working with open source usually means code. Code means the stuff that you write in C or Java or whatever. And these days, code is, open source model of code is kind of free. I mean, most organizations, including Microsoft, release code under open source. This is nothing extraordinary. When we started out 25 years ago, it is very extraordinary. Today, it isn't. The second part is open source model weights. Now, that is new to AI. When you take a raw model, you train it, and you come out with weights, that is what decides how the model is going to respond to questions. Open sourcing that is not a very well articulated concept. But the third thing is open source data sets. Now, I'd like to know what precisely you mean when you refer to open source AI. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for the question. I can come in a bit, and I'll give a bit of background. So when we've had these extensive conversations at the forum now in the work that we do about what open source means, particularly as it pertains to digital public infrastructure. normally and typically when you talk about DPI, the P in public means different things to different people. What we've landed on is that DPI doesn't necessarily mean public as in public sector, but rather public as in common, or generally available to the public. And that's also the definition that we leverage, or the common consensus that we leverage for open source. Not that it is, again, public sector and public driven, but rather that it's ubiquitous and it can be commonly found, that it's something that can be found and used, leveraged, adopted across various jurisdictions, across various regions, regardless of its source, and then can be built upon by different actors across different sectors. So really grounding ourselves in that open source, whether it be a training model or just the code itself, but that it is common, that it is open, that it is free and it can be accessible, is what we mean when we refer to sort of open source. And I think it's what Melinda was referring to. These are just protocols that are available, right? Anyone can download them. If you have the right hardware, you can download them, you can train them, you can build upon them, you can deploy them, and you can integrate them to different models or to different technologies. So that's what the P for us is common, right? Not publicly available, not necessarily publicly driven.
And just to add to that, that common, the notion of common is going to be really important. Again, I keep going back to regulation and minimum requirements. And if you can kind of start with the same ingredients, for lack of better words, how your cake comes out is going to be, dependent upon how you mix those ingredients, manipulate them, and how you bake it. But ultimately, we all kind of start with the same ingredients. If you can kind of start with the same ingredients, it allows us to have it allows those that are governing to have a better starting point, to have sensible, reasonable regulations and requirements. So again, that's why I lean towards, if each model was bespoke and those governments and regulators had to start with something net new every single time, that'd be quite challenging. But if we all kind of have kind of like minimal requirements, or there are certain kind of like known protocols that have been adopted to start with, I think it'll be a little bit easier to manage some of this, because it's going to be quite challenging, honestly. Because here's something I run into. What one regulator in one part of the world, what matters to that group can be dramatically different. I'll give you an example. I mentioned MAS, FCA, and all these other names, right? So it's very clear that when you're doing business in the UK, consumer protection is front and center. So they have financial promotions and consumer duty and things like that. Yes, it matters in the US, but not as much as it matters in the UK.
Are you saying that we're unprotected in the US?
No. not saying that, but like I've just never, like, just getting to kind of see each kind of government and regime has their own thing. So for example, when you look at the EU and MiCA, yes, it's great. They put out a digital asset regulation. But if you kind of backdoor it, they're saying, but we really want EU denominated stablecoins. So you're dealing with regulators who are trying to learn, and then depending on what their priorities are, they're trying to force those as well. So it's going to be complicated no matter what you do. So the more that we can kind of have a common nomenclature and kind of common starting point to at least negotiate with, I think it's going to make things easier, because it's going to be challenging regardless, because this is global adoption for all of these technologies.
Thank you. I know we had a question online, Agustina. I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, there is another question. Is how do we see private technology companies play a role in DPI and AI for social good landscape? Within DPI, now the fundamental topics like digital ID payments have been solved.
What was the last part on solve?
Solve within DPI now. That's the way it's framed. Now the fundamental topics like digital ID payments have been solved. Basically, yeah, it's asking about if the issues related to digital ID and payment have been solved, but that's the context.
Have they been solved?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let Judith come in for a minute. Judith, you're still with us?
Yes, I am. So sort of like to jump in that last bit about the digital ID and payments having been solved, if that's the question, then I think, yeah, it definitely should still be a question, because I would say not solved in very many parts of the world. Still a question. But to the first part, which is around how private technology companies can come in, and I particularly want to talk about AI for social good. I'm not sure if Melinda is still there with us, but one of the initiatives that Meta, for example, is driving on the continent, linked to its large language model Llama, these Llama impact accelerators, and the initiatives where they are incentivizing communities to developers to build on top of their large language models and create products that will um, in some positive way impact society. Um, the the Impact Fund has been going on for a couple of years, I believe, but the current iteration, and the applications are still open for that. What we are seeing is a handshake with government. So, for example, in Nigeria, it's in partnership with the ministry that oversees the digital economy. And I think what's interesting about that is we're starting to see the multi-stakeholder approach to um, driving AI for social good, right? I know when we talk about DPIs, we talk a lot about public-private partnerships and the role that they have in accelerating things. And I think we start to see that with initiatives like this. And there are a number of others. I mean, in country in Nigeria, which I'll reference for my examples, alongside things like the Impact Grant, there are other initiatives from, say, the Gates Foundation, where they're currently investing with the government to create an AI scaling hub that will then allow more people in country to be able to do a number of things, build on models, work on data sets, all of the things that will advance our national AI strategy. So there's, yeah, a huge role for private technology companies. Um, Alongside that, for all of the people that will engage with them. And I think particularly from the regulatory side of things, so government, there is a real need to determine what that engagement looks like and how it will impact people, how it will impact citizens. And of course, there's the citizens piece where people then have to have a voice in saying how these things will affect them. And I think when we start to talk about that voice, we have to think about the digital literacy that's required to enable that.
Yep, and I totally agree with you. Digital identity and payments has not been solved. Yes, there have been enhancements, and we're moving towards, but no, it's actually a great opportunity for people to try to tackle. And I'll just one thing to add to what Judith said. I think it's irresponsible for private companies to create these world-changing technologies and not lean into educating those that have to regulate them. And again, that's just my own personal. Thankfully, I get to, for PayPal, kind of lean in on the regulated side. So that's kind of how me and my team kind of go about it. But to say, hey, we're going to create something that is complex, that can be disruptive, that can be beneficial. Here you go. You figure it out on your own. I think that'll just cause more confusion, angst, just for everyone involved. So I think it's building, leaning in, but then also educating, communicating, and understanding that even though frustrating, you need to bring governments and regulators along for the journey, because that's the society, portion of this whole thing.
Thank you so much. I want to give a final opportunity to any other guests. Oh, yes, please go ahead, sir.
Yeah, hello. Mr. Knut Vatne here from the Norwegian Tax Administration. So I'm representing a large public sector agency in Norway. We're using a lot of basic machine learning, Gen AI tools as co-pilots and for productivity, but we're rather reserved at using advanced AI, like deep learning-based AI and generative AI as well for decision-making that affect the citizens. because we basically can't really explain the results at a satisfactory level. So I wonder, to what degree do you view open source as helping us realizing explainable AI? I mean, open weights or open source code can provide trust on a formal level, but in my view, it does little in the way of actually explaining the results and the decisions on a level that's understandable to the citizen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, one, thank you for that. I would say that this is where, again, just we all take a step back and be humble that these are very interesting and challenging questions. So having that, lower level, hey, we're kind of playing and experimenting in this, I think that would just be great. And then also leaning into those partners who you do work with on the tech side and being able to share your results and see if they can help as well. But I think that it's going to be important to make sure that government agencies are kind of, in a way, mirroring the private sector. If not, that bifurcation will be so great in the long run that we could end up having problems down the road. So to your point, you have a responsibility to the citizens to make sure we get this right, and that's what we're doing now. But then also experimenting here to make sure that you're kind of keeping up with the technology. That way, when it's ready for prime time, which a lot of this is not yet, you can kind of do the cutover. So that's kind of how I see that. And Judith, I don't know if you have, or Judith, I don't know if you, you guys have anything.
I will let panelist Judith come in if she can, and then we only have about a minute left, so I'll go ahead and wrap up. No? Okay. I will go ahead and offer some thoughts on this question and also give us some reflections. We talk a lot about trust at the forum, and I'm very happy to be joined by Daniel Dobrovolsky at the table, who's the head of governance and trust at the World Economic Forum. And we talk a lot about trustworthy decision making, and that's centrally important to decision makers and regulators that, as Larry well put it, have sort of an obligation to the public. And I think you're right. When we talk about AI, we have the luxury of spending all of our days talking about AI and decisions and models and how to play with them in private-public cooperation. But there's a large number of people or groups of people disaggregated throughout the world that maybe don't have the luxury of doing that every day. And to your point, it then becomes necessary to be able to explain and communicate these things in simplified terms so that the user is not only protected, but protected through being informed and well informed, so that then the user can also take action and steps and sort of better decision making themselves or demonstrate their preferences somehow. And that takes, again, a cooperation that's both private and public. These efforts need to be driven jointly. And I sort of want to wrap up by inviting us then, all of us, to think about the future. You know, AI isn't this abstract thing anymore that's being talked about every so often on large news outlets. Rather, it's a technology that's being deployed every single day, and it's being used by both public and private sectors to improve and enhance DPI and the technologies that we all use, whether we're sending money across PayPal or Venmo or Zelle to someone abroad or in a different country, or to our friends after dinner. It's something that we're using to access civic participation, public life, in some countries even voting and other forms of essential civic participation. It's the way that we express our citizenry and that we express our autonomy. So as we sort of venture into this future together, I invite all of us to think about what kind of future it is that we want, and that we're not passive users of this technology, right? We can think about these things every day. We can make decisions every day, and especially the people here in this room, that we all continue to be well informed and advocate for the sort of technologies that we want being deployed in the bedrock of our everyday lives. So thank you again. I thank our lovely panelists, our online moderator, and thank you so much for joining us. And if you have any questions, we're here for the next 10 minutes. Please stick around. Thank you again. Have a lovely day.